Okay, so for decades,
Okay, so for this deep dive,
the
we're
U.S.
heading back to
government
Brazil,
line was basically
specifically 1977.
supernatural stuff,
Right, a
psychic
pretty
powers,
tense time
telepathy,
politically
seeing
with the
things
military
far away
government
with
in
your
charge.
mind.
Definitely.
Pure fantasy. That's
But
what they
our
told
story
everyone.
isn't
Yeah, that was the
focused on the
public
big
phase.
cities.
Complete
We're
skepticism.
going somewhere
But,
really remote.
while that was the
a
official
small
story,
fishing town
behind
called
closed
Colares.
doors,
It's
something
way up in the state of Pará,
something
right
much
near the mouth
stranger
of the
was
Amazon.
apparently going
Picture
on.
this really
Deep
quiet,
inside the intelligence
peaceful
community.
place.
It's a really interesting
Lake revolves
contrast,
around
isn't
the
it?
river.
Until
Publicly,
it
it's
didn't,
all scientific
until the peace was
dismissal.
just completely
Privately,
shattered.
the
By
Pentagon,
things
the
in the
CIA.
sky. Not just
They're
lights,
clearly
but
wrestling
structured
with something
craft.
very
Exactly.
different. These
Locals
fantasies
started
suddenly
reporting
become
these,
glowing
serious
orbs,
strategic
sometimes
issues.
discs, even
Exactly.
cigar or
And
cylinder
that
shapes just
worry, that
hovering
sort of
silently
creeping
at night.
fear about
Hovering
psychic
over their
warfare, it
homes,
leads to
over
one
the
of the
water.
And the
honestly
name they
most
gave it really
bizarre
tells
and
you
top
everything
secret
about the
projects
fear
of the whole
level.
Cold
They called
War.
it the Chupa
Project
Chupa.
Sunstreak.
Chupa Chupa.
I mean, just picture an
that
actual
translates from
government
Portuguese
project
as
trying to
sucks up.
weaponize
It does, and it came
Funded off
directly
the
from
books.
what people
Totally easy.
believed
And
was
officially,
happening
the
to
cover
They
story, or
reported
maybe
these
the initial
intense
idea was
beams of light
remote
shooting
viewing.
down.
Right.
beams that
This
would apparently paralyze
supposed
people on the
ability
spot.
for trained
leave
people to
marks,
just
burns,
perceive
strange puncture
distant
wounds.
places, secret enemy
The feeling
bases, maybe
was
even
the lights
peek
were
into the
literally
future.
sucking
all
something
just
out of
using
them.
their minds.
Blood,
And we
maybe,
should be clear, this
energy.
wasn't
was
some
the
like
core fear.
side
Yeah,
hobby.
it
wasn't
wasn't
just
just
watching
folks
something
messing
weird in the
around.
sky.
People
This was
thought
a
they were being
strategic
physically
move,
attacked.
a direct
Which is why this
response
case
to what
stands
they
out so
thought the
much. It
Soviets
wasn't
were doing.
passive.
They
Not at
were
all.
urgently
And it
trying
led
to
to
get
this
an
major
official
official
military
military
investigation,
battlefield.
And that's what we're doing today. We're
or
going to peel back
Operation
those layers
Prato.
of secrecy,
which the government then tried
really,
pretty hard to keep
deep
under
dive
wraps.
That's
into
right.
Project
And that
Sunstreak
operation, the
and
evidence
the
it
kind of
gathered, and
wild
the secrecy
conspiracy
surrounding
theories that are
it.
still swirling
That's what
around
we're
it.
Yeah,
really
because the
digging
story
into
goes
today.
way beyond just
So these
psychic
attacks,
spying.
Oh, absolutely.
You said they weren't passive.
It might have
How
cracked
did
open the
people
door
describe
to,
them?
well,
What did it feel
alien
like?
contact.
Well,
maybe
the
even
accounts are
some
consistent on
sources
one
suggest
point. These things seem
interdimensional conflict.
predatory.
It gets pretty
They
out there.
seemed
It
to
really
hunt
does.
people.
So we're going to
is
look
the
at where
phrase
it
that
came
comes
from, the
up.
really unsettling
Wow.
things that
Yeah,
viewers reported
and the beams
seeing,
varied.
the
Some described a
weird
very
overlaps
thin
with old
focus
occult
beam,
stuff,
almost like a needle
and
made
these
of light.
incredible claims about
Others reported
contacting,
much broader beams,
well, the
wide enough,
unknown.
they said,
So yeah,
to engulf
settle in.
entire
This is where things
houses.
get weird.
That
So
sounds
where did
terrifying.
Sunstreak even come
And a
from?
physical sensation.
It really kicks
Intense
off back in
heat.
the early
That was the
70s.
first
There was
thing
this sort of
most
quiet
felt, like
panic
really powerful
brewing
heat hitting them.
in the
Followed
intelligence
by
world
Almost
during the Cold
immediately.
War.
Right.
Numbness
Word
in
got
the
out
area
that
of the light
Soviets
hit.
were pouring
And then this
serious
profound
money and effort into
exhaustion, like all
parapsychology.
their energy was
and not just dabbling.
gone.
We're talking
And this wasn't just
state-sponsored
subjective
experiments.
feeling. You mentioned
Telepathy,
doctors got involved.
Yes, and this
objects
is
with the mind,
critical.
psychokinesis,
Local
and
doctors
crucially,
examined
remote
victims.
viewing.
They weren't
Yeah,
just
and when
dealing
U.S.
with panic
intelligence
attacks.
picked
What'd
up
they
on
find?
this,
They documented
alarms went
small,
off.
distinct
Big
puncture
time.
marks,
In the Pentagon,
usually on
You
the
can imagine the
chest
fear,
or
right?
thighs.
What if this
Puncture
stuff is
marks.
real? Even if it only
Like
gets
needles.
a small
Kind of, yeah.
Exactly.
And
The US
often
could be
surrounded by
completely
reddish skin,
blindsided
like a
in a
localized
conflict
burn.
that not
Doesn't
severe,
use
but
bombs or
noticeable.
spies
Okay,
in
so
the
physical
traditional
marks.
sense.
That's
So
already
this
significant.
perceived
But
threat,
it
this
gets more
potential psychic
concerning.
gap,
There were
it leads
reports of
directly to
symptoms
the
that look a
CIA
lot
starting
like
Project Stargate.
radiation
Which was kind of the
exposure.
umbrella
Like what?
program.
And under
Localized
Stargate,
hair
you get
loss
these
near the contact
subcontacts.
site.
Right.
Project
Skin
Sunstreak was one of
irritation that
them,
wouldn't
run
clear
by
up
the Defense
easily.
Intelligence Agency,
And the most,
the DIA,
I think, medically
mostly through
significant
the
finding
1980s.
Okay,
Documented
so
drops
Sunstreak
in red blood
gets
cell
going.
counts in some
And
victims
on
shortly after
paper-
an encounter.
Wait, really?
Its job
Doctors
sounds,
measured a drop in blood
well,
count.
almost
That's what the record
straightforward for that
suggests.
world.
And that one detail
Recruit
makes
people,
it incredibly
train
hard
them
to just
as remote
dismiss this
viewers.
as, mass
Get them to
hysteria
project their
or anxiety.
consciousness,
Yeah, because
basically.
the blood count is a
and
measurable
spy
physical
on
thing.
Soviet
Yeah,
facilities.
but I mean, we should
gather
probably ask,
intel.
how
Standard
reliable were
espionage,
those
just
small
with a
town
very
medical
unconventional
reports
method.
back in
But that's not how
77?
it played out, was it?
Could
It
there be
became clear
pressure?
pretty
Maybe?
fast this
That's a
wasn't
fair
just about
question,
finding
absolutely.
missile
You have to consider
silos.
the
No, almost
context,
right
the
away, the viewers
resources,
weren't just describing,
potential influence
submarine
of the
pens or
regime.
radar
Sure.
installations.
But these
The
doctors
data
were
start
reporting
getting
visible trauma,
weird.
the punctures,
how?
well, that was the big
burns,
turning
and
point.
measured
really.
biological
The viewers started
changes. It
reporting
wasn't
things
just
that
this
based on
person
our
feels
normal
scared.
understanding
And the
of physics and
consistency across
reality
different people.
shouldn't
Exactly.
exist.
Things that
Dozens
shouldn't
of
exist.
people,
Okay,
unrelated,
now we're getting
reporting
somewhere.
the same
Yeah.
cluster of
The information
symptoms.
they were bringing back was
marks,
pushing
the
way
fatigue,
past the boundaries
weird
of what
skin
anyone
issues,
expected.
and sometimes
It
this measured
fundamentally
blood
challenged what the
anomaly.
program was
It
even
points to
supposed to be
something
doing.
systemic.
It
So really
tell me about these
supports that
viewers.
local
They weren't
fear
just
that
random
Chupa
people
Chupa
off the street.
that something
right?
was literally
Yeah.
Many had
taken
military
from them.
background.
It
That's
does.
right.
It gives a
Often
chilling
military
potential
personnel.
reality to that.
And they
name.
went through this
Can you
really
remind us about
specific,
that specific
structured
story, Donna
training,
Maria? It really hits home.
controlled
Yeah,
protocols.
Donna
was the
Maria's
term.
account
like
is
coordinate
harrowing.
remote viewing.
She
or
said she woke up in her
CRV.
hammock
CRV,
one
okay.
night,
So it wasn't
completely
just
paralyzed,
like
couldn't move a
closing your
muscle.
eyes and
Oh,
hoping
man.
for the
And there
best.
was a
No,
beam
no,
of light
very
focused
systematic.
right on
They
her,
might be
scanning
given
her
just a
body.
set of
She
geographic
felt
coordinates or
utterly
maybe a random
powerless.
number
And
linked
afterwards.
to a target.
Totally drained.
Then they'd go through these stages, sort of
depleted,
drilling
and she
down,
found those
describing
telltale
sensory
marks on her
details,
skin.
sketching impressions.
It's the vulnerability that's
trying
so
to
striking.
build
And she
a
wasn't alone.
picture
You
of a
mentioned a
target they knew
fisherman, too.
nothing about.
Right, another
consciously.
story involved
Often
a
something
fisherman
hidden
out
miles
on the
away,
river,
maybe even sealed in an
glowing
envelope
orb
right there in the room.
approached,
And did it
focused a
work?
beam on his
Actually.
arms.
Well, the
His
early
arms went
results were
completely
apparently
numb. He couldn't hold his net, just
intriguing.
dropped it.
Impressive,
Had to
maybe,
retreat.
but
So the
small
fear
scale.
just spiraled.
You know,
Completely.
sketches that
The
looked
whole community
surprisingly like
structure
a
started
Soviet
breaking down.
factory.
People refused
Details
to
about
sleep
a
alone
hidden
or even
bunker
in their
that
own
later
homes.
matched
What did they do?
spy
They
photos.
gathered together in
Enough
open
to keep the
areas
funding
like town
flowing,
square.
definitely.
Okay,
They
so it
lit
had some
huge
legs.
bonfires
But then,
all
like you said,
night.
things
Trying to
took a
ward them
turn.
off.
A
Yeah,
sharp
and
turn,
they
yeah,
banged
because it's
pots
one
and
thing to sketch a
pans,
building you
made
shouldn't
noise
know about. It's
constantly,
something
hoping to
else
scare these
entirely
things
when you're
away. It
trained
was like a
military
siege.
viewers
You can almost
start
feel the
reporting
desperation.
experiences that just
And the local
flat out
papers
defy the
started running
material
these
world as we know it.
wild,
What
sensational headlines.
kind of
It
thing?
became a media
Well,
event, locally
get
at
this.
least.
Some
Was there a
viewers started
religious angle
reporting,
to it?
oh yeah,
Energy
some people were
beings.
convinced it was
Energy
demonic.
beings.
They
Yeah.
started
Not
building
people,
crosses,
not animals, just
holding prayer
conscious
vigils.
energy
They were trying
forms,
that were
anything.
apparently watching
Understandable.
them while
When
they
you're
were doing the
facing
remote
something
viewing.
watching the
Unknown
viewers, okay, that's
and
crazy.
seemingly
Others
hostile.
claimed they weren't
You
just
reach for
moving
any
across
explanation,
space, but
any
across
defense.
time.
But
Getting
the
glimpses
level
of
of
ancient
panic and
history
social
or
disruption
even
got so
future
high,
events.
the
Whoa.
military couldn't
Time
ignore
travel.
it anymore.
Which brings us to Operation Prato.
There's one really
November
famous
1977.
or infamous
Right.
account. The Brazilian Air
A
Force
viewer insisted
insisted they
officially.
saw
What
the
were their
Egyptian
stated
pyramids
goals?
being built.
Officially.
But
Three
not
things.
by Egyptians.
Investigate what was happening,
by, quote,
document any
tall,
evidence they could
luminous
find, and
entities.
crucially
Luminous
restore
entities
order.
building
Calm
the
people
pyramids.
down.
I mean,
Yeah.
that sounds like something
It was
from
led
a,
by an
you
Air
know,
Force
fringe
colonel.
documentary.
Exactly, except these were reports coming from within a
He had the team of
classified
about 30
military
guys.
intelligence
So a
program.
significant
That's what
component.
makes you stop
Definitely.
and think. And they
Yeah,
came
definitely.
equipped.
Any
Proper
other examples?
cameras,
Oh, yeah.
telephoto lenses,
Another one, just
binoculars,
as strange.
sketch pads,
A
even
viewer
scientific
claimed they
gear to
found
measure
hidden
things.
spacecraft
This wasn't just a
under
casual
the
look-see.
ice in
They treated
Antarctica.
it seriously.
As a
Hidden
military intelligence
spacecraft.
operation, yes.
Like UFOs. And the twist
It
is,
seems
the
to be the
investigators quickly
implication.
became witnesses
And
themselves.
guarded,
didn't they?
apparently,
Almost
by
immediately.
some kind of
Leaked
consciousness that
documents
resisted
and later
intrusion,
testimony
like a
confirmed the
psychic
military
guard dog,
team
but
logged
not a
hundreds
dog.
of
Okay,
sightings
wow.
during that
So
short
these reports
operation.
were then just
Hundreds.
ignored
In just over a
filed
month.
away as
Yes.
crazy.
Well, officially,
They
a
weren't
lot
just
of the stuff was
taking notes
probably
on what
downplayed
villagers
or
saw.
buried.
They were
classified
seeing these
deep.
things through their
But
own
inside the
binoculars and
project,
camera lenses. The
Colonel
whispers
Hollanda
started.
himself confirmed
The
this
idea
later.
took
He
hold
did.
that maybe
Years
remote
later,
viewing
he
wasn't
spoke
just about
it.
spying
Said
on
he
the
and his
Soviets
team personally
anymore.
witnessed luminous
Maybe it was
objects,
about making contact.
discs,
And this is where it gets even stranger.
cylinders,
right?
doing
The
things that
connection or the
defied
apparent
physics.
connection to
Like what?
Appearing
occult practices.
instantly,
Yes,
vanishing
that's
just
another
as
layer
fast,
to this whole thing.
moving
that's just
at
fascinating.
impossible speeds. was
People
his
within the
phrase.
program
But they got
apparently
closer than just
started
distant
noticing
lines, right?
these
There was that
disturbing
one incident.
parallels between the remote
one stands
viewing
out.
techniques they were
Hollanda
developing
described an
and
encounter
refining,
where one of these
and
objects
practices
descended
found
really
in
close
really
to his
old
team.
Oh,
occult
close.
traditions.
Close enough that they felt a
Occult traditions,
physical
like
wave
that.
of heat watch over them.
methods
Wow.
described in
Actual
esoteric
physical
orders.
sensation.
Groups
Exactly.
like the Hermetic
Tangible
Order of the
interaction.
Golden Dawn,
Not just seeing
or the
light. And apparently it
Rosicrucians.
freaked
Okay.
the soldiers
They were looking
out.
at rituals
bet.
for astral projection,
These are
achieving
trained
trance
military
states,
personnel.
intense
Right.
visualization
Hollanda reported that some of them
exercises,
panicked,
the whole idea
broke
of
ranks,
separating your
even dropped their
consciousness
weapons.
from your physical body.
That level
Wait,
of
so the
fear
technique
from
Sunstreak
trained
was teaching its
soldiers
military
tells you
viewers.
something about what they
seemed to
experienced.
directly
It
mirror
validates what the
these
villagers have been
ancient
saying all
mystical
along.
practices.
Completely.
It's quite
If it
striking when
scared
you put them
soldiers
side
like
by
that,
side.
imagine
question
being an
becomes,
unarmed fisherman or
was the
villager.
Pentagon.
So they
Was
have
the DIA
hundreds of
inadvertently
sightings, military
stumbling
witnesses,
onto, or
physical
maybe
sensations,
rediscovering
panicked soldiers.
some kind of
Yeah.
ancient technique.
Seems like overwhelming
something
evidence.
mystics
You'd
and
think
secret
so.
But then,
societies had been using for
just
centuries.
like that, the
That's the
operation is shut
implication,
down.
yeah. Was this
December
military intelligence
1977.
program actually an
Barely a month
unwitting or
after it
maybe
started.
witting
Abruptly
occult
shut
experiment?
down.
That's
And
a
the official
pretty
report.
mind-bending thought.
Uh,
And it didn't stop
classified?
there, did
the
it?
official
The
finding?
experiences got darker.
Inconclusive.
They
Inconclusive.
did. Some viewers
After
started
everything they
reporting
saw and
encounters with
documented.
It screams
actively
cover up,
hostile
doesn't it?
All that
presences.
data, all those
Hostile?
photos and
How?
potential
They
footage
describe,
locked
you know,
away.
entering
decades,
a location
that was it. The
mentally,
official line
projecting
was
their
basically
consciousness there,
nothing to
only
see
be
here,
confronted.
probably
Not
mass
by human
hysteria.
guards,
Right.
but
The
by
files
what they
stayed
described
buried
as
for 20
shadowy
years.
entities, things
Dismissed.
that seemed
Until
fully
1997.
aware of their psychic
1997.
intrusion and actively
Colonel
tried
Hollanda,
to block them or
the
push
man
them
who
out.
led
Aware of
Operation
them.
Prato,
Yeah.
Like psychic
gives this
guards.
bombshell
Essentially,
interview
yes,
to a
which
magazine
raises a
called
really
Revista
profound
UFO.
and frankly
UFO magazine.
unsettling
Why
possibility.
there, do you
Which
think?
is,
Well,
After
if the
all that
human
time
mind
keeping
can actually
quiet.
travel
It's hard to
outside the
say
body,
for sure.
Maybe
frustration,
those
guilt.
non-physical
Maybe
realms
he
aren't
felt it was the
empty. only
other
place that would take him
intelligence has already lived
seriously,
there.
or
And
the
maybe they
only
don't
way to get some
appreciate
version of the
visitors.
truth out
Exactly.
without going
Entities
through
that
official
really
channels that
didn't
had
want
silenced
people
him
like the
before.
Sunstreak
What did
viewers
he say
poking
in the
around.
interview?
It makes
He
you
laid
wonder,
it all out. Was
confirmed
Sunstreak
Operation
opening
Prato
doors
was
that had been
absolutely real.
deliberately shut
Confirmed
for
the
a
military
very long
gathered
time?
tons
For
of
a good
evidence.
reason.
Evidence
Okay, so
of
if they
what
were opening
specifically?
doors,
Evidence of structured craft,
What
not just
exactly did
lights.
they find on
And
the
he
other
explicitly
side?
said the villager
Because some of the most
stories, even the
sensational
parts
claims
about the
are about,
paralyzing beams
well,
and the feeling
aliens.
of being drained were true. He
Extraterrestrials.
backed them up.
Absolutely.
That's
This is
huge
where the
coming from
story
the lead
really goes into
investigator.
high gear.
And he dropped another
We
bomb.
actually have
He claimed
declassified
his team
documents,
took
fragments,
hundreds
hints
of
really that
high-quality
suggest
photographs.
some remote viewing
Hundreds.
sessions
And
were
several
specifically
hours of
targeting
movie
Mars.
film,
Mars.
actual video
like
footage
the planet
of these
Mars.
objects in action. planet
action.
Mars.
Footage that has never
There's
been
one
released.
particularly
Never
famous
seen by the
session
public, that was his
cited,
big
where a
reveal.
viewer gave this
Proof
incredibly
exists,
detailed description,
and it's being hidden.
They claimed
And then
they
things
were
took a really
observing
dark
Mars
turn.
millions of
very
years
dark.
ago.
Millions.
Just 2
Millions.
months after
And
that
they
interview
described
came
seeing
out,
these
Colonel
tall
Hollanda
beings
was found
sheltering
dead
inside
at his
massive
home.
pyramidal
The
structures.
official
Pyramids on
cause of
Mars.
death
Pyramids
was
on
ruled
Mars
as
as
their
their
planet
But
was
the timing.
dying
The
around them.
timing is
A
incredibly
civilization facing
suspicious, right?
extinction.
Wow.
He
okay.
breaks 20 years
That's
of
quite a
silence on
claim.
one of the
It is,
military's
and it wasn't
biggest
just Mars.
secrets,
Other
reveals
sessions
missing
allegedly
evidence,
targeted
and 2
well-known
months later,
UFO
he's dead.
hotspots and
It
crash sites
immediately
on Earth,
fueled speculation
including
that he was
Roswell.
silenced. Roswell had to be. We have to state the
And
official
viewers
finding was
reportedly described
suicide.
seeing
but you
non-human
can't
bodies,
ignore the context.
alien artifacts,
No, you
all
absolutely
hidden
can't.
away
It adds
deep
another
inside
layer
classified
of,
government
frankly,
facilities.
menace to
So
the
not
whole
just
story.
seeing things
Did his
far
interview
away,
lead to anything?
but
Did the
seeing
files get
things the
released?
government was
Eventually,
actively
yes,
hiding.
but only
That's
partially.
the claim.
Under
It
pressure
suggests
from
the viewers
researchers
weren't
and
just
activists,
passive observers.
the Brazilian
They
government
were
did
potentially
declassify
uncovering
some
evidence of an
documents in
alien
2004.
presence
What did they
that was
release?
being actively
Hundreds of
concealed.
pages.
And
We
then
got
there's
reports,
Wright-Patterson Air
sketches the
Force
soldiers
Base,
made,
right?
maps, internal
Always comes up in
memos.
these stories.
It confirms the
Wright-Patterson.
operation happened, confirms
Another
the
chilling
sightings,
account
but
involved
the
a
crucial
viewer
stuff
who
Hollanda
claimed
talked
they
about
psychically
hundreds of
entered a
photos,
hidden
the
chamber
hours of
deep
video
underground
footage
there.
still
And
missing.
what do they see?
Containers
Nowhere to be found in the
holding
biological
So the most
specimens
compelling
that were
visual
completely
evidence remains
unlike
hidden.
anything known
Exactly.
on Earth.
Alien bodies,
Which leaves us
basically.
with an
That's
official
the
investigation
strong
that
implication.
documented
And another
extraordinary
viewer,
events,
possibly
but
targeting
whose
the
key
same
findings
location
or
still
a
kept
similar
secret.
one
Which
claimed
means
they witnessed
we're
some
left
kind
trying
of
to piece
psychic
together
network. Something
what really
connecting human
happened
minds to
based on the testimony,
something
the partial
else,
documents,
something beyond
and
our
the physical
world, out
evidence
among the
reported by
stars.
victims. A psychic network
Right.
connecting us
And
to
since the
aliens.
official
That
story
was
is
the report.
incomplete,
We
so you
have to
look
look
at all
at the
these
theories
accounts
that
together:
try to explain
Mars,
it all.
Roswell,
We have those
Wright-Patterson,
anchors,
psychic
the
networks,
burns,
It paints
the
a very different
paralysis,
picture than just
the blood
spying on the
loss to
Soviets.
weigh them against. Completely different.
Okay,
If you
let's run
take
through
these
the main
reports
ones.
at face
Theory
value,
one.
even just partially,
Terrestrial
the
technology.
implication is huge.
Could these UFOs have
Project
actually been
Sunstreak
secret military
might have
craft?
started as
It's a common theory in
but
these
it seems to
cases,
have
especially
pivoted.
given the military
It became
government
about
context,
preparing for
maybe
contact
testing
with
experimental
non-human
drones or weapons,
or maybe
Makes
more
sense on the
cynically,
surface.
about
Silent
making
craft,
sure that
maybe some
contact
kind of
remained a
non-lethal
secret,
weapon causing
kept far
paralysis
away
or
from the
heat.
public
possibly.
But the
But it
theories
struggles
don't
to
even stop
explain
at
the
just
specific
ETs from
physical
other
effects.
planets, do they? Some
Why
people take
design
it
a
even
weapon
further.
to leave
That's
small
right.
puncture
There's a
wounds?
whole other branch
Why
of
would it
theory
cause a
suggesting
drop in
Sunstreak
red blood
wasn't just
cells?
encountering
Doesn't really fit
extraterrestrials,
standard weapons
but
development.
potentially
Not cleanly,
interdimensional
no. It
beings.
feels like stretching to
Interdimensional,
make
like
it fit.
from parallel.
What
Okay, so for
military
decades,
goal does
right,
sucking
the
blood
U.S.
or its
government line was
biological
basically
equivalent achieve?
okay. So that leads us to the
Supernatural
second
stuff,
theory,
psychic
which
powers,
leans into
telepathy,
seeing things far away with your mind.
This theory
Pure
takes
fantasy,
the Chupa
that's what
Chupa
they told
idea more
everyone.
literally.
Yeah, that was the public
that
face.
these weren't
Complete
military
skepticism.
tests,
But,
actual
while that was the official
non-human
story,
entities
behind closed
studying
doors,
or
something,
extracting something from people.
something
Energy,
much stranger was
plasma,
apparently going on.
blood samples.
Deep
Something
inside
vital,
the
yeah.
intelligence
This theory
community.
aligns much
It's a
better
really
with the
interesting
specific
contrast,
symptoms,
isn't it?
the paralysis
Publicly,
of
it's all
control,
scientific
the beams for
dismissal.
extraction,
Privately, the
puncture
Pentagon,
marks,
the CIA,
fatigue, and
they're
especially
clearly
the
wrestling with
documented
something very
blood count
different.
changes.
These
It provides a
fantasies suddenly
motive,
become
however disturbing.
a serious
It's an
strategic
active,
issue.
ongoing
Exactly.
operation
And
by
that
something.
worry, that sort of creeping
Then there's the
fear
idea
about
of psychic
psychic warfare,
warfare
and
in
it
a
leads to
global
one of the
context.
honestly
Similar
most
things happening
bizarre
elsewhere.
and top secret
Absolutely.
projects of the whole
Researchers
Cold
point
War,
out that the
Project Sunstreak.
1970s were a
I mean,
peak
just picture
period for
an
UFO
actual
sightings,
government
and
project trying to
particularly for
weaponize the
abduction
human
reports
mind,
worldwide.
funded off the books,
And the details
told
match.
match.
And
Often,
officially, the
yes.
cover story, or maybe the
Reports
initial
of
idea,
paralysis,
was
missing
remote
time,
viewing, strange
Right.
medical
This
exams, unusual
supposed
scars. These
ability
echo
for
accounts
trained
from
people
many
to
different
just
countries during that era.
perceive
So maybe
distant
Operation
places,
Prato
secret
wasn't
enemy
just a
bases,
local
maybe even
Brazilian
peek into the
anomaly,
future,
but part
all
of a
just
global
using their
wave.
minds.
That's the implication.
And we should be clear,
that
this
whatever
wasn't
was
some,
happening
like,
in Colares
side
might have
hobby.
happened
It wasn't
elsewhere,
just
too.
a few folks
Which
messing
connects to
around.
another
Yeah.
theory
This was a
involving
strategic
international
move, a
plans.
direct response to
US
what they
cover-up
thought the
theory.
Soviets were
Right.
doing.
This
They
suggests
were
the Brazilian
urgently trying to
military
get an
didn't
edge
just
and
classify
it
their
completely
findings
new
for
kind
domestic
of
reasons.
That's the
Battlefield.
idea. And that's what we're
The
doing today.
theory
We're going to
posits
peel
that
back those
Brazil,
layers of
perhaps needing
secrecy,
support during the
really
Cold War or
deep
wanting
dive
advanced
into
tech,
Project
shared shared its
streak
findings,
and
especially
the
that
kind of
crucial
wild
photo and
conspiracy
video
theories
evidence
that are still
with the
swirling
United
around it.
States.
Yeah,
In
because the
exchange
story
for what?
goes way beyond
Secrecy?
just psychic
Aid?
spying.
Oh,
Potentially.
absolutely.
And
It
if
might
the
have
U.S.
cracked
was
open
also
the door
investigating
to,
UFOs,
well,
getting
alien
concrete
contact,
visual
maybe
proof
even
of
some
potentially
sources
hostile
suggest
craft like those
interdimensional
seen in
conflict.
Colares
It
would
gets
be
pretty out there.
invaluable
It really does.
intelligence.
So
And
we're going
if
to look
the
at where
US
it came
took
from,
the
the really
evidence,
unsettling
It would
things that
neatly
viewers
explain
reported
why
seeing,
those specific
the
photos and videos
weird overlaps
vanished
with old
from the
occult stuff,
Brazilian files,
and
even
these
when other
incredible
documents
claims
were
about
later released.
contacting,
It suggests the cover-up
the
became
unknown.
international.
So yeah, settle in. This is where
Plausible,
things get weird.
given the geopolitics
So where
of
did
the time.
Sunstreak
It
even
fits the
come
pattern
from?
of missing evidence.
It really
certainly.
kicks off.
Finally,
back in
let's
the early
just
70s,
revisit
there was
that
this
core
sort of
fear.
quiet
The
panic
simplest and
brewing
maybe most direct
in the
explanation
intelligence
based
world
only on
during the
Victor
Cold War.
reports.
Right. Word got
The
out
energy
that the
drain.
Soviets
Yeah,
were
stripping
pouring
away the who
serious
and why,
money and
just
effort into
focusing on the what.
parapsychology.
And
The
not just
victims
dabbling. We're
consistently
talking
reported feeling
state-sponsored
drained,
experiments,
weakened.
telepathy,
The doctors noted
moving
signs
objects with
consistent
the
with
mind,
blood loss or
psychokinesis,
biological
and
depletion.
crucially, remote
So this theory
viewing.
just says
Yeah, and
whatever
when
these
U.S.
things
intelligence
were,
picked
their
up on
primary
this,
interaction
alarms
involved
went
taking
off.
something
Big
vital
time. in the
blood,
Pentagon,
plasma,
especially.
life
You can imagine the
force, call it
fear,
what
right?
you will,
What if this
from
stuff is
people they
real?
targeted.
Even if it only
Exactly.
gives
It doesn't
a small advantage.
speculate on
Exactly.
origin.
The
just
U.S.
on
could
the
be
observed
completely
action and
blindsided in
It
a
takes the Chupa
conflict
Chupa
that
name
doesn't
at
use
face value
bombs or
based on the
spies in the
reported
traditional
experience.
sense.
It's so
chilling
this
because it
perceived
centers
threat,
the
this
physical
potential
violation
psychic gap.
reported by so
It
many.
leads directly
It
to
really
the
does.
CIA starting
Ultimately,
Project Stargate.
Operation
Which was
Prato
kind of
leaves
the
us with
umbrella
this
program.
huge
And under Stargate,
documented
you get
mystery.
these sub-projects.
What makes it stand out
Project Sunstreak was
compared
one
to
of
other
them,
famous
run by the
cases?
Defense
I think
Intelligence
it's the
Agency,
sheer
the
volume
DIA,
and
mostly
official
through the
nature
1980s.
of the evidence,
Okay.
even the
So
partial
Sunstreak
evidence we have.
gets
We're not
going,
talking about one
and
person's
on
story.
paper,
We're talking hundreds
its
of
job
civilian witnesses.
sounds
Dozens
well,
of
almost
trained
straightforward
military
for that
observers,
world.
official reports,
Recruit
medical
people,
documentation,
train them as
sketches,
remote
maps.
viewers,
It's one of the
get them
most
to project their
thoroughly and officially
consciousness, basically,
investigated close
and
encounter
spy
cases
on Soviet
record.
facilities,
Even if the
gather
conclusions were
intel.
suppressed.
Standard espionage,
investigation
just with
itself
a very
happened, and it found
unconventional
something
method.
significant.
But that's not how it
Absolutely.
played out, was it?
The
It became
terror
clear
in
pretty
Colares
fast
was
this wasn't just about
undeniably
finding
real.
missile
The
silos.
military
No, almost
response
right
was
away,
real.
the
The
viewers
evidence
weren't
they
just
gathered was
describing,
substantial.
submarine
And the
pens or
decision to
radar
bury it
installations. The
seems
data
just as
start
real.
getting
The paper trail suggests the Brazilian
Weird
Air
how.
Force knew
Well,
they
that
weren't
was the big
dealing with
turning point,
hysteria
really.
or weather
The viewers started reporting
and their
things
priority
that,
became
based on our normal
controlling that
understanding of physics and
information,
reality,
Which makes Colonel
shouldn't
Hollanda's
exist.
Things that
final
shouldn't
words.
exist.
Okay,
Before his
now
death.
we're getting
Yeah.
somewhere.
All the more
Yeah,
powerful.
the
It really
information
does.
they
It's
were
a
bringing
defiant
back was
statement from the
pushing
man who
way
saw it
past
all
the boundaries
firsthand.
of what
We'll
anyone
leave you with that
expected.
quote from Colonel
It
Hollanda.
fundamentally challenged what
We
the
saw what we
program
saw.
was even
The
supposed
lights
to be
were
doing.
real. The
So
craft
tell
were
me
real.
about these viewers.
And they were
They
not
weren't just
from this
random
earth.
people off the street, right?
Something to
Yeah.
think
Many
about.
had military
What did the
backgrounds.
Brazilian
That's right.
military
Often
really
military personnel.
find in the Amazon?
And they went through this
And why won't
really
they show
specific,
us?